Everybody. Hello, low ego action heroes. It's Debbie Levitt from deltacx.com. How's everybody doing? I hope everybody is safe and healthy and keeping cool. I've got my fan on. It is Thursday, August 13th, 2020. Welcome to episode 66, Improving Your Resilience. And we've got a new special guest here, so I am not going to delay. We're going to get straight into it and meet her and be talking about resilience because it's something we all need to think about and improve. So, with that, let me bring in Ruth Diaz. And Ruth, no one can introduce oneself better than oneself. So, would you please tell us all about you?
Yeah, thank you for the challenge and thanks for having me, Debbie. So, my name is Ruth Diaz. I am an organizational consultant and leadership coach, talking to you from Portland, Oregon. And I am very passionate about resilience much of the time. And the other parts of the time, I'm not feeling resilient and feel like an imposter if anybody brings the word up. And one of my favorite things in the world is working with people and organizations when they are feeling low resilience and conflict avoidant, and reminding them about all the ways they still are resilient. So when I teach about resilience, I remember my own resilience also. And that makes me a disciple of resilience more than, like, I don't know, a deity of it. Yeah, so that's me.
Well, great. Fantastic. So, just so we're all on the same page, let me throw you the easy question. How do we define resilience?
Well, I think my first answer to that would be less about the definition and more about the action, is that resilience is defined differently in every moment. Sometimes it is not screaming at somebody in reaction, and sometimes it is actually stepping up and having a bigger response than we normally would. And sometimes it's just persisting and feeling really numb. So the definition that we can all Google has to do with, like, I'm experiencing adversity and I find a way to lean in through it and grow from it.
Okay, great, great. So, um, it seems like that this could also maybe be, and again, I'm not a qualified psychologist, but it seems like this could possibly be a self-awareness issue. Are people good at recognizing when they're resilient and when they're lacking it?
Hmm. I like the question because the funny thing about psychology is that, at least within the field, there's a joke that the higher the education you get, the more every answer you give is "it depends."
Okay.
I would say that because I don't identify as a psychologist and I'm actually getting out of the therapy field, I'm going to go more into my own experience and what I've observed, which is that when we have a trauma response, which is I'm overwhelmed by my environment and I'm in a fear based mode, we shut down parts of our brain very automatically. We don't choose to do this. And those parts of our brain include creative solutions that become and appear to other people as resilient.
Mm.
And so I would say people have a hard time recognizing themselves and each other when they're overwhelmed. And
And these are overwhelming
resilience is a
times.
yeah, exactly. There's so many options of how to feel buried, and, like, we all have a justification for the first time in global human history for manifesting some version of agoraphobia, as in we don't want to ever leave our homes and go outside,
Right.
or having some types of anxiety responses to being touched. This is a piece where it's
People standing
actually
too close to
really
you.
self-protective. Exactly. And yet, because of that, and because we are social creatures and our bodies regulate off of each other, when we have an anxiety or an overwhelm response and we don't have somebody's breathing and heartbeat next to us nearby that's staying calm, we can stay in that escalated trauma response for a much longer period of time.
Yeah, it does feel
Yeah, I
like
like
if
your deep breath.
we, yeah, it's like, Oh, I'm going to absorb that for a moment because it really feels like you just summed up every headline we've all read for the last 4 years, or if well, 4 years and 4 months, in different ways, with
Yeah.
so many things that are going on locally, regionally, nationally, internationally, and it's really hard to feel like you're gonna push through and you make it. I think that many people have the sense of like, I might not make it. I think people
Mm.
might be
Yeah.
facing mortality. S-
Hmm. That
So,
that's very real.
Yeah, certainly more real than it was last year. I did not think last
Hmm.
year I was going to wonder if I was going to die of a international disease. So I want to bring it a
Hmm.
little closer to our industry. So in the CX and UX world, some of us say that emotional intelligence is important and low ego is important, and that there are certain traits that tend to, I guess you could say, predict that you might be better in a CX and UX career if you possess these traits, or can strengthen these traits. And resilience is one of them. When we did our podcast on 10 traits every worker should have, and you can roll back in the YouTube archives for that one, everybody, resilience was on the list. And for me, and you may or may not be that familiar with the craziness happening in our industry, but very often at jobs, we are in constant conflict. UX is
Mm.
completely misunderstood. Nobody seems to know why we're there. Everyone thinks our job is so easy, anybody can do it. So why are these people here? And they usually fight us at every step. We're not given autonomy. And so, because we haven't been able to change that, we've just said, holy cats, if you think you're going to go into this, you're going to need a mountain of resilience. And that's why I was so excited
Mm.
to talk to you about this. What can
Mm.
you share from some of your experiences or observations or the models you're working on? What do we do? What do we do when we're in this
Mm.
constant world of work conflict?
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for that story. I am immersed in consulting work with an organization that is CX UX based, and that is partly how we met. And one of the things I've heard observed, in addition to this concept coming out, and there's a book now, I think, called Fail to Learn, which is really emphasizing that as human beings, we've forgotten how important failure is.
Mm,
And that if we flip it and decide, like, the only way I will learn is by failing, it creates a really different outcome when we really like go after the failure and do it wrong and still see what comes out of that too. So when you say the word conflict, I always feel like that word makes people tense in their body. Often we think of conflict as something where people are physically fighting, where somebody's going to run away or walk away or disappear and never come back. The conflict that we recognize as conflict is the most tail end extreme versions of conflict. And what I appreciate about the story you just told is that conflict can also be micro expressive and a constant negotiation. Like, I am somebody that's quite a bit with words. Sometimes that's entertaining to people. Every once in a while, it's irritating. So you can totally tell me or make fun of me for that. I look at the word like intention and break it up and spell it differently. That intention can also be to be in TENSION together. We are leaning in and feeling the tension of our creativity and our storming together. And so, groups, especially when you're co creating with groups, storming is a really important function to have a good product and to learn how to conflict together and create higher quality work. If you take the storming away, the group has slower product and less complex and less high quality, less accurate. So conflict needs to be reprogrammed, I think, in all of humanity as something to recognize along with excitement. when we're in conflict, we trust each other enough to say some harder things and learn through it and grow with it.
And when you say storming, the definition I've heard of that is kind of like kind of intense collaboration. Is that the definition that you mean of it, or are you using a different I don't want to assume.
That would be the most functional version of storming. That's where we're all aiming for.
Okay.
I was once part of a community led process group for almost 20 years weekly. And I stormed out of this group in the
Ah,
early years twice, as many people did. That we all had our different cycles of just, putting our hands on our hips and going, I don't know what I thought this group was, but it is not the group for me.
right.
And then we still were friends outside of the group, and so we would circle back in. And the second time I came back and watched a few of my friends have that same response of just feeling like, wow, now I know the truth about all of you, and walk away, I realized that just like our earth and our continents have seasons depending on where we are on the planet, groups have seasons. And before I even knew the language of those seasons, I started to understand that trees cannot grow without the storms that pull all their leaves off and push their sap into the ground and snap their branches. They will suffocate. And groups also need those storms, and it can either be an external force of pressure and deadline,
Mm,
or if that doesn't happen, it can also be an internal force of discord where groups will scapegoat each other, find somebody to target. Groups will scapegoat the power above it and decide that, like, it's the structure of the organization we're in, but yeah, we're going to just ride the storm out together. There's all kinds of ways to push off and define a sense of self and bond and lean into that. And that's a bigger definition of storming.
great, thanks. Yeah, it's a little different than what I had read. I was reading like an engineering definition of it. So when
Mm,
I think about resilience, I feel like it sounds like it can be group based, but it also, to me, and again, I'm no expert, but to me, it feels extremely personal and situational and changing all the time. So knowing that we need resilience for the jobs we're trying to do, are there ways where we can recognize in ourselves, like, ooh, I'm being low resilience right now? Is there
mm,
like a
mm,
sign or a little question we can ask ourselves where we can identify that's what we're feeling or going through?
mm. That's a really interesting way to put it. I I would say the moment that I think I'm being low resilience, I'm the closest to a resilient return,
Okay.
because that is self-awareness, right?
Mm,
So the first thing to do is going, if I'm low resilient, that means I'm in full reaction instead of responding. So maybe in response to your question of like, can we ask ourselves, is this a reaction or a response?
okay.
So some of the most resilient people I believe that I've ever talked to was when I worked crisis lines for 2 years. And this was a unique crisis line that plugged into crisis lines all over the world. And uh, these people would call and all have a very similar theme of saying, I can't handle life, or I can't handle my family, or I can't handle this person. And that energy, that buildup, that storm would either be going towards themselves or towards other people. And the answer always came back to, and you called and asked for help. And that's resilience.
Right.
So, first question is this a response or a reaction? If it's a reaction, then how do I step back and set a boundary, take space, write down what's being said to me? Some of the most challenging times for me around resilience is when I'm getting critical feedback, because I have this storm come up in me of just going like, wow, you're looking at one angle of me and seeing me as crooked, but if you just stood at any other angle, you would see all the other things I'm juggling and carrying and
That's a great,
how much
why
work I
don't
put
you
into
see
this.
me?
Yeah. Yeah. And so one of the ways that I've coached people and learned to do myself is when I recognize, oh, here comes some intense feedback that is not going to feel good, is I take really good notes. I learn to write that down, and I learn to just say thank you for your feedback. And whatever it is, even if somebody tells me I'm worthless and should go away and never do what I'm doing again, thank you for your feedback. I'll get back to you.
Yeah. Let
And
me
then I give
let me
myself
work on that.
space to really process that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And that will build more bridges and create more learning than anything else. Using
That's
the words, thank you for your feedback, and I'll get back to you.
Yeah, and I want to talk a lot more about this because a lot of the conflict I've had with people in the past X months has been when I reviewed their work portfolios and I didn't have the best news
Mm.
for them. But before I go there, we don't have a sponsor for this show, so you all have to sit through a 10-second video about my company. Here it is. Delta CX, available for CX and UX consulting, projects, and training. Contact us for a free consultation. See, that wasn't so bad. You
Mm.
made it. And just a
I love
reminder,
it.
just a reminder that the best way you can support me and what the Delta CX YouTube channel does is to come and subscribe on YouTube, ring the bell so you know when I'm live, which is usually 3 or 4 times a week. And we have a Slack workspace, which is completely free. You can join it at deltacx.link, which is my URL shortener, /join Slack, all one word, lowercase. And we've got over 200 people there, and you are just welcome to come and hang out and ask questions and get my attention if you need it. And also, thanks to algorithms, please remember if you're enjoying the video to press like, leave a comment, and tell people about the channel. And by the way, we've got 10 people watching us live, so thanks for tuning in. And if you have any comments or questions, we want to hear them. You agree, you disagree. We promise we've got good resilience. We want to hear it. So I want to go back to what we were just talking about before our pseudo commercial break, which was one of the places where I tend to have the most conflict with people, at least in the work universe and in the past, say, almost year, is I do a lot of portfolio reviews for people who work in CX and UX or are looking to get into it. Maybe they're just out of a program or a boot camp and they're trying to put together a portfolio. And unfortunately, many of these portfolios do have some shortcomings. And so I've done a number of podcasts and articles trying to explain to people how to make your portfolio better. But still, even so, there are many times where I see some tough things. And my approach is to say, look, if I were the hiring manager, here's why I might not interview you. And here's what you need to
Mm.
work on. And I would say
Mm.
many people, I get a lot of responses that say, ooh, that was a little hard to hear, but you said the thing that nobody else would say, and now I know what to work on. I get
Mhm.
ghosted by about 10% of people, and I would say 5 or so% of people battle me on what I've said.
Mm.
How dare
Mm.
you? I didn't expect to hear this. Who are you? Or I think my favorite one was everything you said was negative. My boot camps praised me for. My boot camp praised me for
Mm.
all the things you said
Mm.
something negative about. So I find that there ends up a lot of conflict in that area, but I don't want to change what I'm doing. I don't want to be just another cheerleader, not giving these people feedback. Is there something I could change in the delivery? Is there something they could change in how they hear it? Because I've had some people react badly and then later on say to me, oops, sorry I reacted badly. I think I was being really defensive and I think you said something I needed to hear. So,
Mm.
like where can this be improved by what I say? Can this be improved by how they take it? Where do we start?
Yeah, thank you. So one piece I can give you as a resource is a book called Radical Candor. Have you heard of this book? It's by
I
Kim Scott.
haven't. I'm going to Google it while we're talking and put it up on the screen.
Yeah, it's a good book. It has actually a shape on the front of it that is a double axis, an XY axis, which is the very skeletal base of the model that I work with that you can see on my website. figureitin.org. And this model is actually recognizing the archetypes or the kind of reactive personality constructs we all flip into when we are overwhelmed, and that there's 4 of them instead of 3. Most of us are familiar with fight, flight, and freeze.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe to some degree there were a lot of scientists that were measuring these and weren't looking for this 4th one until
Oops.
very recently.
I
Oh,
accidentally
thank
hit
you.
confetti.
I appreciate the intro. We're
I
having
meant
the
to hit
party.
this
Yes,
button to
radical
slide
candor.
in the book. So everybody, she's recommending Radical Candor by Kim Scott. I
Radical
am so
candor
sorry
by
I
Kim Scott.
accidentally set off the
No,
confetti.
that's really fun.
Thank you.
It was a good punchline. I was just going like, okay, now the balloons are going to fall, as I say. So the 4th reactive
Yes.
response is fix. And
Ooh.
it's where we go into a heroic place and we believe we're being helpful. And yet, if we do too much fixing or if we do it in the wrong timing, we can actually be perceived as a different survival archetype or
The
personality, which is the
aggressor.
villain.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, there are stereotypes to certain people in the world or what is it? Not roles, but like qualifiers. So the boss is considered the villain, or there's things stereotyping like saying a black angry woman. A woman might just be assertive, but I was raised being told I was really stubborn and
I
never
was
told the
told I
word
was
assertive. I don't think
arbitrary.
my Yes. I was told I was going to be a lawyer. That was the
Is
way
that an
that was
insult or a
semi
compliment?
positively redirected. Yeah. And I was like, am I going to win? But yeah, there was this way that I was being given all this nonverbal feedback of you're being too much, Ruth, but not
Mm,
being recognized in that my brother, if he was being assertive, was
that was
really
good.
praised as a
Yes.
future leader. And
Mm.
so we have a lot of conditioning of what we're expecting from somebody. So some of the people taking feedback from you might be expecting a more nurturing parental female role that really they get super triggered by. Exactly. They feel like you just kind of like stripped them naked and told them that they're not even worthy to be fed.
Yikes. And I
And
don't
and
want,
that's
yeah, no, I haven't,
yeah.
yeah. I know I'm not
And
saying
so
that, but I know that some people hear
yeah.
that.
And so, one way that you might consider after reading the Radical Candor book and recognizing that what Kim Scott says is radical comes from not this, I'm going to go be an extreme activist, but radical actually comes from the word anchor root. It's radical means anchor. It's that place where we are so core centered, we are in our power. And so we're going to be fierce and tell the truth, but the candor piece can also imply a type of caring. I care about you enough to tell you the truth.
Mm.
And so
That is always my
and
intention.
so yeah. And so one way you could potentially experiment with this is saying, I sometimes have a reaction from people where they feel like I'm fighting them and I'm tearing them apart. And so I need you to tell me what your body language is when you have received enough feedback from me. Or
Mm.
if you're doing it written, you get to
I do it as
say,
a
you
video.
know,
Yeah. I send them a video,
okay,
so
yeah,
there isn't a live interaction. I do try to warn people that
interesting.
my portfolio reviews are tough love, that I'm typically pointing out
Mm-hmm,
things that they may not have heard other people say. But
mm-hmm,
that I do this because
yeah.
I care about people, I care about the industry, and if these people are
Mm,
struggling to find a job, which could be because of something in their portfolio, I'm hoping maybe I can get to the bottom of it. But
mm-hmm.
I'm definitely that
And
fixed
so
person.
yeah. And so then the transformed role, when we realize, like, uh oh, now I'm in fix it and I'm fixing you in a way that you didn't know you were broken.
Or
And so
didn't
now
want to
you're
be
going to take
fixed.
this as an aggressor.
Right.
Yeah. And even if boot camp validated them and 9 out of 10 hiring managers would say, I'm not taking this, 1 out of 10 might say, I'm willing to give this a try and work with you. I see potential. So one of the things I was told throughout my training professionally, especially within psychology, is if you get a bad review by a supervisor, take note of it, really like write it down, think about it, but do not take it very seriously. Always wait for a second bad review and look for it. But if you can't find it, then that just means you had a polarizing kind of reactive response with them, and
Okay,
they
that's a good
they
point.
were seeing a skewed angle. So one way that you can just really, first of all, is ask them, how much feedback do you want? I'll give you top 3 points. You can also organize it into bite-sized pieces where you have some body language that holds up your hand and say, you might want to take a breath before this one might hurt. Giving them more cueing that this is going to be a hard thing and they might want to take it in chunks.
That's great. That's
And
a great
then
idea. Thank
yeah,
you.
good. Another piece that you could think about is, how did you grow beyond you trying to like protect and help the profession shine and become more diverse and higher quality? We all grow off of each other. And so telling them that, like, I'm going to tell you 3 hard things about your portfolio. I could look at my own portfolio and tell you 3 hard things about my portfolio.
My portfolio needs a lot of love.
There you go. So like saying, like, I'm going to give you the same strategy piece that I could do for anybody, including myself. And then the fourth thing I'm going to do is tell you something that really sparked interest in me and grew me. And that I'm grateful to have done this because I learned something here. And I'm going to tell you what I learned through how you made this information available. And that you don't make the video until you've actually learned something. And so they're holding their breath a bit, taking the punches, but they also know at the end there's going to be a hug and going like, hey, and thanks for this, by the way. Now go grow with the other things. The other funny thing about what you said is that my boot camp praised me.
Yeah.
um, when we call anything a boot camp, it's going to imply that everybody's in survival mode and trying to pass and get through and not be killed.
Oh man.
So
Too
it's going to be
accidentally too
hard to,
true.
yeah, it's going to be really something to take with caution. And throughout grad school, whenever my colleagues praised me, I carefully like looked for it, how true that might be, because a lot of times it was out of survival, and it was out of a sense of just like, if I say something, I'll get participation points and sound like I know what I'm talking about.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's a good training to give feedback, but it doesn't necessarily mean, if you're in a training called boot camp, that anybody is really looking at it from the eye of the user, that is not going to be in survival mode and is going to want really, really baby food, delicious, bite-sized pieces that just really plug in perfectly. It's not going to be as easy to get somebody to be impressed. Like you said about your field, is nobody kind of knows you're there until it goes wrong, and
Right.
then you get in trouble.
Right.
So like, when you said it, I thought about the story of, what is it, Wizard of Oz and the man with the big giant head, and how your field is actually the mechanic that was never on screen, that was helping the man with big giant head. Like,
Right.
he actually was on screen, but your field is the person that did, the extra scene got cut out kind of thing. But
The
that
behind the scenes
archetype is still
wizards.
really, yeah, the behind the scenes wizards. That's right. The person that really helped the man with big giant head look like he knew what he was doing and make him very impressive looking. And so just recognizing, like, that might be a call out, that people in your field who experience it as pretty brutal and feeling unseen, they're going to be more defensive when somebody within their field that's considered a bigger name or more established comes after them with feedback. It's going to feel pretty devastating, because if they don't see me out there and you don't see me, then who's going to see me?
Yeah, great point. Great
and
point.
and yeah. So
Yeah.
those are some ideas for you on how to kind of soften
Yeah.
it and give people
I
more of
will
an orientation that
I will
lets
definitely
them
use
roll
that
with it.
from now on with my portfolio reviews. Thank you. Great ideas. And I want to ask the
Hmm.
same question from the other angle. Let's say I do some of your things, and let's say my portfolio review video still feels like a bit of a crashing pile of bricks for the person who's receiving it. What can they do if they, especially if they're feeling like this is the first time hearing that my work is not perfect because the boot camp or the
Mhm.
mentors or my friends or somebody said everything was great. What
Mhm.
can those people do in that moment where they're hearing maybe some unexpected surprise, negative feedback? Any tips for that side of the fence?
Hmm. Yeah, I would say when I get negative feedback, I especially these days, if somebody actually is really critical of me, I've actually learned to put them on a short list to get on my advisory board.
Hmm.
I want people who are actually like telling me where I'm lacking and what I'm doing wrong to help me grow. I have a lot of people who are learning all the time from me and they're not giving me the feedback I need. And so my advisors are people I adore and admire a lot, so it makes it easier to take their critical feedback.
Right.
And they are also people that I'm always trying to impress and failing at miserably. So so I would say to the people that you are most critical of, they have the most potential. It is a bit of a flip and kind of candy coating experience that probably like poop, but the most potential. Poop is like a fertilizer to impress you someday. And so, one of the things that if you are really emotionally feeling triggered or horrified, you can say, "You're going to see nonverbal me that I'm pretty sad that you made it, you passed through boot camp and you didn't get this feedback. I can tell you didn't get this, and I'm going to offer you an invitation for the people that really grow a lot to send me a video back of how you've improved after a month of processing this and doing something different. Just do something different. And you are welcome to send me a 1 minute video back on how you're doing that and check in.
Yeah,
And
I
so
do.
what you do
I
is you get to
at the
like,
end of most of the portfolio reviews, I do say like, "Hey, keep me posted. Message me on LinkedIn. Let me know how things are going." Some people do, and some people don't. And we are getting a
yeah,
question in the chat room.
oh,
Thank
hello.
you to Kathleen Guzman, friend of the show, who pops in now and then. She says, a situation I was in years back, there was one person in the group that was constantly trying to push their agenda, even when the client explicitly said they don't want us to focus on that thing. That group member would cherry pick information from the internet to make it look like their way was the right way. It was a very draining project. There were a lot of tears, multiple people on the team. I definitely didn't feel like
Oof.
I had the resilience I needed for the situation. Do you have advice for people who find themselves in a situation like that?
Oof. Yeah. It sounds like somebody became the contrarian and got stuck in that role. Um,
Or
to
see our
step
previous
away from that
podcast
really.
on narcissists at work.
Well, so that's one way to frame it, right? And yet, when we put somebody in the label of narcissist, we imply a chronicity to them that then creates a suffering for anybody who's encountering them. And I can't grow around a narcissist because they're just always going to be that way.
Right.
I saw a meme maybe a year ago, didn't I think have a name attached to it, but I loved it. It said, narcissists are God's gift to empaths to take better care of themselves.
Ooh, that hits
Yeah.
home.
Yeah, right? So it was just this sense of like, oh yeah, if I'm perceiving a narcissist, it might mean that they're showing me all the places I haven't set boundaries so that it couldn't escalate. We couldn't get this close. It couldn't turn into this kind of tingle. And so I get to say, ooh, thank you for the mirror of all the places I need to set better boundaries. and then I get to step away and get distance. In the situation Kathleen's describing, it sounds like a work or a project where it was contained and there wasn't necessarily the chance to exit out of it.
Right.
But that's not entirely true. That, we can take 5-minute breaks, 2-minute breaks, we can journal. I can't tell you how many classrooms I was in where I had 2 sets of notes. One was what the teacher required me to know, and 2 was actual, like, critical observation of the effect the teacher was having on the classroom.
Hmm.
And it was like an ongoing letter to myself of what I would do different if I ever end up teaching this class, of saying,
Okay.
like, please don't forget this piece. Oh my goodness, like, there's this contrarian who keeps bringing this thing up, and you don't know how to facilitate this, but this is my suggestions to try. And I would Google, like, how do you work with this contrarian that just keeps raising their hand?
So how do you work with a
Some of
contrarian like Kathleen's nightmare teammate?
Yeah. Well, and so then that brings me to the question of what was the structure of the group? Was there assigned leader? Were there different leaders for different parts? And a lot of times when there's contrarians, there's a need that's somewhat undeveloped in that person to actually be a leader,
Hmm.
and they don't know it yet. And so if there was a leader, and I am just in a basic way imagining myself in Kathleen's situation, and I was watching a contrarian experience, I would actually approach the leader outside of the group and say, I wonder if they need a different role. And it looks like you're having a hard time and they're having a hard time. And I'm wondering what I can do to support them and you in a different role so that they don't have to be in the adversarial position constantly.
Is that
And
a
and
subtle
I
way
would
of saying they might be happier on a different team or project?
Possibly, but I look at it again like the archetypes. So I actually had an advisory board meeting yesterday, and I watched the contrarian on this board that if somebody said, "Hey, I really like this one thing you're doing, Ruth," the contrarian often would go like, "Yeah, I actually don't like that and I don't get it at all." And this flipped yesterday. And the first person to speak up was the contrarian. And instead they said, wow, that's really refreshing to see. And the person who's always softening and being really nurturing was like, yeah, no, I'm actually having a really strong reaction to that. I don't like that. So I pointed that out to them both with some delight. And I said, wow, it's so nice to see that switch. Thank you.
Right.
When we get stuck in those archetypal roles, they escalate, and then we feel like the victim, or we feel like we have to fix it, or we feel frozen. So when I experience those things, I use that to go inward. Here's this storm happening. It's making everybody in the group bystanders. The creative flow is getting stuck. And I get
Everybody's
to
looking for
say, this
someone
is
else to
us.
fix it.
Exactly. And so I get to go, I'm not necessarily the elected leader here, but I get to coach myself on how I would lead this differently. I get to look for the windows, even if this person is presenting as narcissistic. 9 out of 10 things they say is just like, wow, are you listening to yourself? 1 out of 10 of those things might have a question in it, might have
Mm.
an outreach, might have a curiosity. And I get to be looking for that more appropriate thing they're saying and really land on that and reinforce it. I really like how you said that.
Latch on to the
And so
good
what I'm
stuff.
doing is latch on to the pieces that become harmonious. And what happens is then we grow more of that instead of trying to scapegoat them. I'm curious if Kathleen's still around and listening to this, if this person ended up leaving the group or how the project ended up, because sometimes in the end, when something's finished, it doesn't feel quite that bad to everyone. They just became kind of the lightning rod of change and dysfunction while everybody else kind of worked around them and and did still a pretty good product. So sometimes it does become a fracture point, but it doesn't have to be, especially if not everybody agrees on it. If somebody is saying they're still used to this person, let's see a way to include them differently, then it can shift.
It reminds me of one of my best friends has a coworker who I think is a little bit below her in hierarchy, but every time I talk to my friend, she's like, "This guy does nothing. I don't know what they're paying this guy to do, and they told me to give him some
Mm,
work off my plate, and he doesn't do it." And
mhm,
and this seems like an incredibly
mhm,
draining
mhm,
person. And and so it sounds like she could try some of these techniques with him, but then also I feel like there's an element here in resilience, but I could be wrong, of
mhm,
self-care.
mhm. And when I'm describing that journaling piece for myself, that was my self-care, is this idea that sometimes our greatest teachers are the people who model the worst behavior. And even though they don't know that they're causing harm or in a place of pain and suffering and reacting instead of responding, I can grow my roots deeper. I can actually learn how to, like, wow, normally I sit in class for 3 hours, or I work in this group incessantly and I don't take breaks, but I'm going to set an alarm for myself and get up and walk out of the room every 45 minutes. And I'm going to go on a very short walk and take deep breaths. And people might think I have bladder issues, or I have a complex life or whatever, and they can ask, but I don't have to tell them.
Right.
And I can just do this as a meditative experience and know this too shall pass. And that impacts a group when we know we're going to get through it and we know that we're going to be okay, even if we don't feel okay right now. That's nonverbal body language, which is up to 80% of how we communicate, is the nonverbals. So we can say all the right things and still be creating all kinds of conflict. And we can also say the wrong things and do it in a way that is so bonding that everybody tries to help us find our way to actually say the right things in the right way.
Thank you for that. And Kathleen says, "We all stayed together to the end of the project. We didn't have an option to be reassigned outside of the project." So
Yeah.
I typed back, because Kathleen's on LinkedIn, and for some reason, LinkedIn is like 3 minutes behind us. So typing might be a little
Mm,
faster. I said, "What about a team leader? Did a team leader step in?" And she said, "There was no official team leader, but there was someone
mm,
assigned as the main point of contact to the client." So it sounds like
mhm,
nobody wanted to take charge, nobody wanted to deal with this.
mhm.
Maybe it was everyone
Yeah.
became a half victim, half bystander.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say if anybody's ever done jury duty, which I have,
I have
that's
not.
a really good example of the storming that can happen when you're trying to find a leader that's willing to step up and competent to step up and has the elected vote within that tiny impromptu group. So when I hear those details, I think the contrarian in that group was escalated, but I can't tell you how many burned out contrarians I have worked with in organizational settings who, when they see this model that I teach, and I'm given them specifically, I'm assigned them as their coach
Mm.
because they're identified by so many people as the contrarians. And as soon as they see this model, they say, "Oh my God, I'm the villain." And oh my God, I'm putting this horrible pressure in this room. And they will identify the moment I walk into work, I change. If you ask
Ooh,
people at my home environment, if you ask in other
I'm the
places, they don't
cuddliest bear
experience me this
ever.
way.
Right.
Yeah. And so that is a flag to me that this is an archetypal manifestation of a poor structure for the group, and and that this person was kind of feeling pain of that, and almost obsessing about something that the group had said no to, and not knowing how to yield to the group, what I call the group creature, and be resilient with the group creature instead of being attached to the outcome where they were just like, but this is the answer.
Right. Everyone
So
listen to me.
resilience, yeah, resilience is a mix of being able to melt and soften and also be more rigid and flexible. If we're too soft, then we don't know how to lead and we'll have people tantrum all around us, and we're not assertive, we're in that passive role and it'll flip into aggressive. And then also having those boundaries to be more like the bamboo and bend with the wind, but hold structure, hold a sense of like, I'm here, I have limits, and I will walk away. And I'm glad to be here in the meantime.
So you mentioned a couple of times your model. How can people
Yeah.
get to know your model? And I'm getting ready to type a web address and put it up on the screen. So is this on your website or is there a book? How can people get to know your model?
Yeah, thank you. There's a book in process. There is a website though. It is called Figure It In instead of Figure It Out, figureitin.org. And there is a place you can sign up for a free half-hour webinar. And we get a big enough group going, ready to do that, and then we'll do that remotely. Um, and there's also, we've just started a season of webcast podcasts where people get to see versions of the model applied to leaders in the world. And I have conversations with them about their pain points and also their strengths, how their humanity shows up in their leadership and how they're doing better with that and being resilient. So my model is called the DOT model. It stands for Deepen, Orient, Transform. And it's about addressing conflict with a resiliency framework instead of an avoidance framework, which is by default mostly what people say when they hear the word conflict. Well, I don't like conflict. And the more that you work with the model, the more you start to recognize all the micro conflicts that are really ways that we're trying to be playful with each other and build relationship, and we just miss each other. And then we come back and we hit harder and harder until it really can create fracture and harm. And so how to dance with the micro conflicts and see patterns where we would normally shut down and be overwhelmed and then think, oh, here it is again, I'm cursed, I just show up in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right. I mean, we were
So
talking
deepen,
last
orient,
night.
transform.
Last night we did how to recognize gaslighting and being set up to fail. And we talked about how some people just seem to be in a pattern of every time they go into a new job, it's out of the frying pan, into the fire, into another dysfunctional, toxic company or team or department that doesn't get what we do and thinks we're jerks and thinks we're useless. And it just seems like some sort of, again, Groundhog Day. And
Mm-hmm.
so it sounds like there might be something in this model for people with that feeling to see if there's a
Yeah.
pattern they can break out of.
Yeah, absolutely. It is amazing how much power we have that we don't know we're yielding, even when we have those repeated experiences. So that sense of being invisible and that sense of then being targeted, there's ways to work with those patterns and recognize, yes, my field might have the stereotype of the invisible mechanic that becomes the patsy, becomes the targeted one. And it doesn't mean that has to be this company, and it doesn't mean that that has to be me. And so, how do I get my own professional development and coaching, like I am a leadership coach, to transform the reputation of this field and what I do and really showcase myself in a vulnerable, striking way where people can't forget me because I'm the most human and also the most creative and resilient person in the room.
Cool,
And
cool.
and that will transform the profession in the face of it.
Fantastic. We need that. Caroline is here. Always happy to see Caroline, friend of the show. And she says,
Hi,
can
Karen.
resilience be encouraged to others, like advocating more resilience to a team to teach how they can better understand and become resilient? So they can always bring you in as a
Mm,
consultant, but outside of that,
mhm,
can Caroline show up to
mhm,
her team and go, we need more resilience? And then what does she say
mhm.
next? Or what book does she wave around? Or
That's a great question. I have another book for you, one of my favorites, and I sometimes just listen to this in as an audiobook for fun. It's called
I'm
The
ready.
Culture Code.
The Culture Code. I'll
And
have to Google that and see who wrote
yes,
it.
yeah, I'm going to forget the author right now. And it actually,
Daniel Coyle? The
yes, it's
Secrets
about
of Highly
really,
Successful Groups. Is
mhm,
that it?
yeah, that's
Okay,
it.
got it. Okay, let me put
It
that on the
talks
screen.
about really unique and brilliant groups and what the characteristics are in those groups. And it tells really interesting stories that some of those stories still, if I listen to it, I'll cry, and some of them make me laugh. And it's an amazing reframe in a very human way of what we haven't been paying attention to in organizational psychology on the ingredients that bakes the cake that is an extraordinary group. We've been measuring like what's the product and how many of this kind of person do we have in the group, and the culture code has to do with like how many times do people appreciate each other, how many vacations do people take, how many other professions have people been in before they ended up in that group, before they ended up in this particular field. And so it's looking at some really unique ingredients we haven't ever been measuring for, and showing some cool stories of how that looks. And mostly what I would say, is it Caroline? Who is
That was
this person
Caroline. Yeah.
asking? Caroline. Mostly what I would say is be careful about toxic positivity, which is rampant and everywhere in the world, where what we do when we feel a negativity or a toxicity in an environment is we tell everyone to smile and brighten up and think it's going to be okay.
Just toughen up.
That just have, bootstraps. We're all bootstraps, and it's sunny outside, or look, we're able, we can walk, or there's all kinds of ways we bypass the experience that's really tough that is happening. And one of the ways to release the toxins, release the swamp in a group, is by acknowledging, both cognitively by saying it, but also through our emotions, by actually embodying it, of just saying, when I come to this group, sometimes I feel really heavy and sad, and saying that to the whole group. It's going to create awkwardness. Absolutely. Sure. In a work group, that's going to feel weird. However, what it does is it lets everybody have permission and look for how they're also embodying that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And once we all acknowledge something, there's a phrase in Gestalt psychology that is one of the core philosophies of it, that says, the moment I accept things as they are, they can no longer remain the same. So if something is stuck, there is something in that something that I have not accepted and embraced and allowed it to be. And so sometimes when a group is stuck, when a group is really in the sludge, we're not naming it. And so instead of asking them to be more resilient, I would invite you to say, I don't feel resilient in this group. I feel like we all just kind of collapse over and over. How do you feel in this group?
Right.
And conversely, just like our narcissist archetype, 9 out of 10 times when this group meets, it might do this collapsing pattern, but 1 out of those 10 times, it's going to shift. There'll be something different. And if you're wanting to build resilience in the group, your job is to become a scientist of those times when it's different, and really validate other ingredients like that are happening when it does the collapsing pattern of going like, hey, we all came in and we said we slept better, and then we got more work done, or we all started meeting in the afternoons, and then we stopped complaining as much. And if you recognize those little ingredients, the group can start to build some self-awareness to understand really what the storm is they're avoiding, or they have never made it through into the performing stage.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. So much. So many great ideas and advice. I can't believe we're almost out of time. So we're going to have to, I know, we're going to have to start winding down. As usual, let me just take a moment to give people some show notes for next week. So here's what's coming up next week in the podcast universe. Monday, we're going to have Adam, the CEO of Traction, which is a really great agency in San Francisco, talking about how agencies can push past order taking. Which I think is important. And so I'm excited to hear what he's going to tell everybody about how we push past being order takers. Tuesday, of course, is office hours. Ask me anything. Come on down. These are all, of course, at 6:30 p.m. Italy time. Please adjust for wherever you live. Wednesday, I'm taking off because it's my boyfriend's birthday. And it looks like Thursday I'm taking off because I am training a company on Axure. Yes, I can train you on Axure. And then the following week, we have a guest but no topic. So I don't know what to tell you yet about Monday the 24th, but it will be Elisa Delgado talking about I don't know what yet, but she's amazing. We've had some fun conversations. Tuesday, office hours, ask me anything. Wednesday, the 26th. I can't remember what we named this one, but my notes say newbies trying to look like experts. So I think we're going to be talking about some awkwardness that we tend to see out there when people extremely new to UX are trying to write how-to articles or something like that and accidentally making themselves look not so great. And so that's some of the plans coming up for the rest of August. Please tune in if you are so inclined. If you cannot make it, remember that everything is always archived on the YouTube channel. deltacx.tv will redirect you there. And these podcasts, the one with the numbers, they go out audio only the next day on iTunes, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. So you can always find us in whatever medium you prefer. So Ruth, some last words. Where can people find you? How can they connect with you? Are you a tweeter? Are you a LinkedIner? Where can people find you?
Thank you. And very interesting itinerary. I love how active you are. If I was in CX UX, I might consider this my meditative church or something where I'm just like, okay, let me go to the altar and like pray and get some new lessons, and then
I don't have a good effect
go
for
back
that.
out.
It's like, oh, I didn't set off my special effect. Let's see, I'll use this one. Let's see, are my special effects working?
Oh,
No.
we have
They broke.
creative.
I know, I'm going to have to
Is
go.
it church music? I was feeling it.
It's
Yeah.
church music. No, let's see, it's this.
Oh, hearts. Exactly. Yeah. There's something there's something kind of vicarious about being the person that's helping everybody learn in an easier way, and the necessity that the learning facilitator be seeking out their own learning, and that you are providing that service of just saying that ultimately when the expertise grows enough, I can just start offering this as kind of a beacon and a pillar and an orienting force of information. So I appreciate that about you. And I've been interviewed here and there and had lots of conversations, but I've never had such a nurturing and enjoyable and fascinating conversation with someone for like a month before I went on.
Yeah, we had
I've enjoyed
a lot
that so
of,
much.
we've been LinkedIn messaging behind the scenes. We're now officially pen pals.
Yeah.
Thank you for all of that as well. So where can people
Yeah.
connect with you? Are you an
Yeah.
emailer, a tweeter? Where do we find you?
Yeah, I would say easiest way probably would be to find me through my webpage or through LinkedIn. Those are the places I frequent the most online. And then if you're within the US and want to set up a free coaching consultation, especially if you're in a leadership role, then I will make room for that. And we can see what I can recommend for you, either that we can work on together or sending you some resources. And yeah, I love the learning field. It's new to me, but I'm rapidly going, this might be another career for me someday. Yeah.
Always just keep changing, just keep trying new things.
Exactly.
All right. So this has been fantastic. I'm so happy with how this went. And thank you so much for coming on and being in the hot seat with questions. We didn't plan anything before. We were just like, we'll just go there. So thank you.
Go with it. Yeah.
We did. And thanks to the 10 or so people who joined us live today and asked some questions. And again, if your question wasn't answered, please track down Ruth on LinkedIn or her website, figureitin.org, and track her down and ask her the things. So I'm going to play us out of here. But Ruth, thank you again. And hopefully we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thank you, Debbie.
Thanks. Bye, everybody. Thanks for watching. Delta CX is available for consulting and projects related to CX and UX strategy, leadership, training, problem finding, problem solving, and innovation. Learn more at deltacx.com.